what shall we say, irrefragable as, say, the laws of formal logic or mathematics or astronomy. No. But it is the fact that a certain common moral code does seem to be innate to the species. For example, if you take the so-called golden rule, which is differently phrased, but it essentially means don't do to another person what would be repulsive done to yourself. There's an element of tautology in it, but it works as a kind of injunction. Well, it certainly was uttered by Rabbi Hillel, a Babylonian rabbi, and it seems to be phrased in the Analects of Confucius as well. In other words, it appears to be common to anyone who's thought about the good or how to lead the good life. And that seems to be enough for me. I mean, I think one of the dangers of, if you'll excuse me, those of you here who are Christian who say, I wouldn't know any of this if I wasn't Christian, is it runs the very dangerous risk of saying that common knowledge of the moral properties of behavior in humanity are exclusive only to those who confess one faith. That would, it seem to me, be an immoral position to take on its face.
Now, it seems to me that you're running together again two quite distinct issues. One is the issue in what we call moral ontology. That would be, what is the basis in reality for objective morals and duties? The other is moral epistemology, which is how we come to know moral duties and values. And the claim here is not that we need to know or have belief in God in order to discover what objective morals and values there are. As a Christian, one could be open to any manner of methods of coming to know moral values and duties. The issue is the ontological question, what is the basis in reality for the existence of objective moral values and duties? And I think a number of people on the panel have suggested, and you yourself seem to admit, that there really isn't a sort of transcendent basis for these moral values and duties, that these are just the spin-offs of sociobiological evolution. And if you were to rerun the film of evolution backwards and then start it anew, a very different sort of creature might have emerged from the evolutionary process with quite a different set of values. And so, therefore, for us to claim that our values are objectively true and binding is to be guilty of speciesism, a sort of bias in favor of your own species. And so it does seem that there's a lack or an absence of a foundation for moral objectivity on the naturalistic view.
But you set a trap of your own making there. The human primate is both a lot more moral and able to apprehend moral issues, moral questions, and in behavior a great deal more immoral than any other species. And we bear, as Charles Darwin says, we bear inevitably the stamp of our lowly origin. It's very clear who our cousins and our close relatives are. We are animals.
But if morality is just a function of whatever it is we happen to be doing, evolutionarily speaking, then that doesn't make any sense to even use the word morality or immorality. It's just what we're doing.
No, well, let's say if you wanted a working definition of the moral or the good, it would have to include some element of what we call the golden rule. In other words, caring for other people, not just because you want them to care for you, but because there's pleasure in caring for them available for you too.
Why does it have to include that?
Well, it happens to be anything else, as you say, would be reductionist, would be functionalist only, which is a rather arid way of addressing questions of nobility, honor, obligation, and the most mysterious of all the words, agape, love. We can't prove the existence of love, but you sure can't disprove it either. And you can't imagine a world where the word didn't have a meaning and people looked at you blankly. But none of this requires the supernatural. There's the numinous, and you've mentioned, sir, the transcendent. These are dimensions of our own imagination and our own cortex.
Well, if that's true, like
our susceptibility to music, for instance. But it doesn't require. There's all the difference in the world between the numinous and the transcendent and the supernatural, especially the supervising, superintending, intervening bossmanship of a divine, unchangeable authority.
But if there is no transcendent, then these are just the accidental byproducts of the socio-biological evolutionary process.
I insist there is a transcendent and a numinous.
You insist?
I've just been making that very distinction. I'm sorry if I...
No, I thought you said there was no...
No, I expressed myself poorly. I appeal to I put myself in the safekeeping of the audience. Did I or did I not just say that the struggle is to realize that while there is a transcendent and a numinous available to us through our imaginations. I would give the examples of love, susceptibility to music, landscape, poetry, architecture, and so forth. There is no need for this to become a supernatural, especially not a supernatural that contains a hidden but unalterable, supervising, superintending, intervening dictator.
Let's have one brief reply to that, and then we'll get to another.
I hope the distinction is plain here.
What's the transcendent?
Thank you. Yeah, my question would be, upon what basis does the transcendent possibly come to exist then? If
He said it was a product of our imagination.
It's a product of our
and
imaginative
so we call it a transcendent.
of our imaginative faculty. Let me give you a case in point. So, Dr. Francis Collins will be known to you.
Of course. Sure.
And I'm sure known to everyone here, or should I say, who would I insult if I identified Dr. Collins? He's the very distinguished scientist who completed the work of the Human Genome Project, for which we're all enormously in his debt, and he's a confessing and believing Christian. And in his own account of matters, he says he's an outdoors man, and he went on a long hike, I believe it was in the Pacific Northwest, and one morning he came to a frozen waterfall frozen. There were 3 waterfalls coming down like this. Imagine a sort of fork of 3, frozen. And he said at that point, he dropped to his knees and accepted Jesus as his personal savior. Now, I think that I perfectly understand what's being said there, though I regard it as questionable in a number of ways. What if there hadn't been 3? I'm presuming the 3 is important. Somehow with Christians it is. What if it had been 4? What if it had been 2? Would he not have accepted Jesus as personal savior? What is there about frozen water that makes you think one religion is more true than another? Would it be just as good if he'd said, I suddenly realized there's only one God and Muhammad is his messenger?
Would
it be just as good with the same waterfall?
Would someone quickly deal with the issue?
It's still,
Exactly.
I still know that some people are powerfully affected by landscape, imagery, and music.
Here's the problem. You can't use the word transcendent without saying it transcends what?
That's right.
The space-time continuum is all it is. When our imaginations bump their head on the ceiling, there's no way to get out. There's no transcendent.
The imagination is part of
the space. Yes.
Well, now who's being reductionist now?
I'm just using your...
I'm applying it to your world.
You're saying if I won't buy the whole supernatural, I can't even have love, music, landscape, and poetry.
You can't have them mean anything.
Well, be careful.
And you can't explain them.
Right.
Anyway, to me, Dr. Collins' remark is touching and affecting, and makes me think in some ways more highly of him as a person. But it is a completely meaningless, not to say nonsensical statement.
Okay, next question,
Not
please.
Hi there. This is for Mr. Hitchens and Mr. Wilson. One of the kind of the subtopic of this has Christianity been beneficial for the world? And I think that if you look at the Christian Reformation, right, and the Reform movement, you see in this like the beginnings and kind of the seeds of like the progressive movement and the humanist movements and the liberal kind of revolution that's existed since then. So by turning the kind of Roman sacerdotalism to a position of individual responsibility for faith, invest the individual with a new role of action in our society. You see that when everything's to the glory of God, kings and nobility suddenly are called into question. You even see something like with the Westminster Confession, like something that looks very similar to the written constitutions that came later for states. Cromwell undermines the king and brings parliamentary power into play. And if you look at the history of the early radical Reformation, you're looking at places like Switzerland, the Netherlands, and England, which kind of form the base for these. For the early expression of these ideas. And then the most radical of the reformers are shipped out of Europe and shipped over to the United States and form this revolutionary experiment in this country. So what my question then is do you accept this as being true, that the Reformation is inextricably tied to the progress in human freedom that we've seen over the last several centuries? And if not, why not? And if so, Mr. Hitchens, wouldn't that maybe suggest that this particular branch of Christianity, the Reformed tradition, is maybe more good than bad? And for Mr. Wilson, what does it say about the internal consistency and the eternal immutability of this position, that you can draw a line, that it seems to consume itself? Because you can draw a line from Calvin to Hume to Mr. Hitchens here, not to give you a big head comparing you to David Hume.
That was 2 questions. Let's deal with those quickly. There's other people waiting. Thank you.
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Well, you're right in guessing, as I think you have, that I am a Protestant atheist.